Hey, what is up, mortals? It is TallDragon here. Your son appears to not have a quirk, Miss Midoriya. The doctor's worried voice faded away as Izuku Midoriya heard the words, quirkless. In a world where 80% of people had some form of supernatural ability called a quirk, Izuku had none at all. As he aged, he and his mother had hoped that it would eventually develop, that perhaps he was just a late starter, but the years continued to pass by and nothing ever changed. Quirkless. The word made Izuku's face contort with anger. Growing up, it had always been his dream to be a hero, to use his quirk to fight villains and save those in need. That dream was gone in an instant. From that day forward, others treated Izuku as less than human. He was bullied at school and ignored in public. His mother did her best to cheer him up, but it was a wasted effort. Izuku Midoriya was a quirkless, and no amount of parental love or medical advice would change that. The world filled Izuku's mind every second of every day. Quirkless, quirkless, quirkless. Of all the horrible things that could have happened to him, why did he have to be quirkless? He tried his best to fit in, still hanging out with the other children. But as their quirks began to develop, he became more and more excluded. The exclusion and bullying was mainly led by one kid, Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku had always looked up to Bakugo, a child with a powerful explosion quirk that set him apart from his fellow classmates. But Bakugo's relentless bullying and harassment started to lead Izuku into resentment. If he had a quirk, he could stand up for himself. If he had a quirk, he would have friends to talk to and hang out with. Maybe he could have even teamed up with Bakugo in the future, and they might have been best friends and partners. Finally, Izuku grew tired of feeling helpless. He may be quirkless, but he could still be strong. He could still fight. "Mother, please," Izuku begged his mother. "Let me sign up for self-defense classes." Izuku's mother, Inko Midoriya, frowned at him. "I don't want you fighting, Izuku. There's no reason for you to learn when you're... She hesitated to find the right words without offending Izuku, who had grown short-tempered and rowdy. "I know, Mother. Quirkless. You don't have to be ashamed to say it," Izuku said coldly. "I don't want to learn to fight. I want to learn to protect myself in case one day I don't have a choice." His mother sighed before hugging her son. First it was sets of weights for home, now he wanted to take martial arts and defense classes. She had the gnawing feeling that he had more on his mind than just defending himself in the event he was attacked. But then again, maybe it would be better that he could protect himself. It would help her sleep at night, and maybe it would help instill Izuku with some discipline and confidence to make up for his lack of a quirk. "Okay, fine, Izuku. You can take your self-defense classes, on the condition that you promise me to never use what you learn unless absolutely necessary," his mother said sternly. "If I hear the slightest bit of a rumor that you've been harassing or bullying other kids, I'll pull you out in an instant, and take away your weights, too." Izuku looked into the concerned eyes of his mother. "I promise, Mom. I just want to stay safe so I can take care of you," Izuku muttered. It was a half-truth. Izuku did want to be able to stay safe and defend himself, but he also had other ideas. The years of bullying had led Izuku to resent those with quirks, and that resentment led to the desire for revenge. He wanted to show people that even without a quirk, he could still be strong. He could still fight and win. He began studying his notebook every night, learning the quirks and fighting style of every professional hero and every classmate with hero potential. He started to note their weaknesses and habits, and how to exploit them. He grew stronger thanks to the combined efforts of his weight training and martial arts classes, which he kept a secret from everyone but his mother. When the time for the yearly physical test came, Izuku scored well even without his quirk. He was still well below average, but he wasn't the worst. It was time for him to start planning his next moves. "Oi, Deku!" Bakugo's arrogant tone pulled Izuku from his thoughts. It was a nickname given to him during one of Bakugo's bullying sessions. It roughly translated to useless person. The name stuck among Izuku's classmates. He hated it. It filled him with a violent rage every time he heard it, especially coming from Bakugo. "Oh hey, Bakugo, what's up?" Izuku kept his cool, convinced he wouldn't show Bakugo any of the emotion he fed off of. "I just wanted to tell you that I got accepted into UA High. You know the one. The high school for the best upcoming heroes. The ones with actual potential," Bakugo sneered. Sure enough, this is another one of Bakugo's irritating bully moments. "Oh, that's great, Bakugo. I'm happy for you. Maybe being at such a prestigious school will teach you how to not be such a horribly rude person," Izuku jabbed back. Years of being bullied had allowed him to know just where to prod Bakugo to make him angry. Bakugo pushed himself away from the wall he had been leaning against, his eyes instantly filled with anger. "What the hell did you just say to me, you worthless nobody?" He began walking towards Izuku, who stood up from the park bench he was sitting at, staring at Bakugo with defiance. Small sparks and flames began to flicker in Bakugo's hands, a sure sign that he was riled up. "You heard me, Bakugo. You've never respected a single person in your entire life, because you think your quirk is the best quirk ever.
But even with a quirk, you're still a low-life piece of trash because of how you treat people.
Izuku wasn't thinking now. He just let the thoughts he had been building up over these years spew out of his mouth. He knew there was no turning back now.
I'll kill you, you miserable runt!
Bakugo yelled as he began to run towards Izuku, his hands clenched, swirling with the sparks of his quirk. Izuku didn't back down. Years of being bullied gave him a wealth of knowledge into how Bakugo fought. Combined with his strength and combat training, he was confident he could at least hold his own. Maybe that would show Bakugo that he's not useless after all. He slid his right foot back and waited for Bakugo's first move. Sure enough, he saw the punch coming from a mile away. Bakugo's right hand was already back, winding up for what he thought would be an easy one-hit knockout against the defenseless rat in front of him. Izuku stepped forward, stopping Bakugo's haymaker long before it gained momentum, and drove his elbow hard into his attacker's chest. Bakugo stumbled back, caught off guard and shocked at the power Izuku delivered with one short motion, before regaining his footing and glaring at Izuku.
Who the hell do you think you are?
Bakugo snarled at Izuku.
You don't have a quirk. I can blast you away and no one would even care. I'd be doing everyone a favor.
Bakugo found confidence in his own words as bullies often do, and lunged back at Izuku. But Izuku saw the attempted tackle and the instant Bakugo dove and stepped aside, delivering a punch to Bakugo's exposed ribs. Bakugo gasped, the air knocked from his lungs as he hit the ground face first. Izuku hesitated, debating whether he should leave now while Bakugo was winded or finish the fight decisively, just to be sure Bakugo wouldn't attack him again. This moment of hesitation was all it took for Bakugo to blast his way up, using his quirk's explosion to get him off the ground and stir up the dust around them, blinding Izuku for a brief moment. Bakugo yelled as he launched explosions randomly into the dust, hoping to hit Izuku and finish the fight. He didn't know where or when Izuku became strong, but he was still confident this fight was his to win. The dust finally cleared and Izuku was nowhere to be seen. Had Bakugo blasted him into nothing? Or perhaps Izuku had ran away afraid of the power of his quirk. He turned to leave and saw Izuku standing directly behind him face to face. Bakugo didn't have time to react or say anything before Izuku punched him hard in the ribs again. He doubled over, gasping for air, and was met with Izuku's knee coming up, driving hard into his chest and knocking him off his feet and onto his back. In an instant, Izuku was over him, another hard punch to the ribs and an audible snap. Izuku smiled with the satisfaction of the sound. He threw another punch to Bakugo's unguarded face, a stiff jab aimed right at his nose. There was another satisfying crunch beneath his hand as he broke Bakugo's nose. Bakugo went limp, and his eyes rolled into the back of his head. But years of pent-up rage and hatred drove Izuku, who continued to pound on the unconscious Bakugo's body, repeatedly punching and kicking him while he lay helpless on the ground. When Izuku was finally out of breath, he looked down at the bloody body of Bakugo with a smirk. He spit on him and then began his walk home. A few hours later, there was a knock on the door of the Midoriya residence. Izuku was in his bedroom, tending to his bruised knuckles and reveling in the recent victory over the person who had made his life until this point a living hell. He heard pounding footsteps toward his room, and the door was thrown open forcefully to reveal his mother, red in the face and practically hyperventilating.
You in the living room now,
she said through clenched teeth. Izuku moved from his bed and followed his mother to the living room to see Bakugo's mother crying on the couch. He couldn't explain the feeling, but seeing a member of Bakugo's family upset filled him with joy.
Bakugo's mom here said someone called her and reported that they had found her son unconscious in the park outside of the school, beaten almost beyond recognition. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Izuku?
His mother was doing her best to keep from screaming. Her voice was strained and the veins were practically popping out of her neck. Before Izuku could even get his words out, she interrupted him.
Don't lie to me, Izuku. When Bakugo finally woke up in the hospital, he told him that it was you who did that to him. What the hell is wrong with you?
Izuku shrugged.
He's been bullying me for years now, and I finally couldn't take it anymore. So when he tried to attack me, I defended myself. He deserved it, I swear.
Izuku was forcing his voice to sound sorry and pleading, but deep down he felt explosions of happiness. He had put Bakugo in the hospital. He had severely injured one of the strongest of his classmates, despite everyone thinking him to be a quirkless nobody.
I can't believe you, Izuku. Defending yourself is one thing, but beating someone so they had to be sent to the hospital? You took things way too far and you know it. You're not going back to your classes. I'm taking away your weights and you're apologizing to Bakugo and his mother for what you did. Not to mention I'm going to have to pick up the hospital bill for this to keep you from going to jail.
His mother was livid. She was screaming now, unable to control her voice any longer. Bakugo's mother was still sobbing on the couch in the living room, unable to speak. Izuku sighed and went back to his room while his mother sat down to try to console the crying woman on the couch. He felt no regret for what he had done. Bakugo deserved it for being such an arrogant asshole, and honestly, he thought most heroes deserve it. They use all of their fame and money to do whatever they want in life, and most don't even stop to acknowledge the less important people. They needed to be put back in their place. They need to be reminded that even though they're strong, they're still just people, and not deserving of all the praise they receive. Izuku lay in his bed with all of the lights off, staring at the ceiling.
Izuku, it's time for dinner!
His mother shouted from the kitchen. He didn't move from his bed. It had been almost a week since his fight with Bakugo. His mother had talked to the police and he had gotten off with a warning, as he had lied through his teeth about the fight being self-defense. As soon as the patrol car had left, his mother gave his weights away to a family friend and called to have his self-defense classes cancelled. He knew he had no right to be mad at her for it. She had warned him ahead of time that's what she would do. He pushed himself out of bed to go eat dinner, but stopped before leaving his room. His gaze lingered on the notebook he had on his desk, and an idea began to form in his mind. Izuku was quiet at dinner, quieter than usual. It didn't take his mother long to catch on.
Izuku, is everything okay?
She asked him, her brow wrinkled with concern.
Yeah, Mom, I'm fine. Just tired,
he said distantly. His mind was on something else. They ate the rest of their dinner in silence, the only sound coming from their silverware. As soon as Izuku finished his meal, he went back to his bedroom and closed the door. Inko Midoriya stared down the hall to his room quietly. She was scared he was going to do something that might cause him to get hurt. Izuku sat at his desk, looking through his notebook and scribbling notes with passion. In this book, he had written down every pro hero, their quirks, their strengths and weaknesses, which agency they owned or were employed to, the zones they patrolled, and their biggest fights. Every bit of information available to the public about the pros he had written down in this notebook. Now he was studying, searching for a hero that he could take in a fight. If he could prove to the world that you didn't need a quirk to be a hero, maybe they would stop giving them all the respect that they didn't deserve. Around midnight, Izuku finally had his plan in place. He knew he wouldn't be able to beat a pro hero with a physically powerful quirk, and he would be beaten on the spot if he tried to fight someone with a ranged quirk. He had narrowed his search down to one professional team of heroes, the Wild Wild Pussycats, a professional agency that mostly did support work for the other heroes. Most of their members were weak to physical confrontation. If he could catch one off guard, he might be able to finish the fight before they knew what had hit them. Over the next few days, Izuku took his time planning his attack. He watched countless hours of footage from the Wild Wild Pussycats fan page. Videos from interviews, fan recordings of fights, personal blogs, news coverage, even advertisements. He wanted to learn everything he could about his next victim. He finally decided his target would be Shino Sosaki, better known by her hero name, Mandalay. Her quirk allowed her to send messages to people telepathically, a quirk that would be useless to her in a fight. He decided he would go out on his next day off from school and scope out the agency, and begin taking his notes on their patterns and routines. When Izuku returned to school following a short suspension for fighting, everyone stared at him fearfully. Hurried whispers were exchanged between classmates as he walked by on his way to class. He paid no attention to them. He didn't have time for the gossip and rumors. He didn't care. During class, his teacher didn't call on him to answer a single question. Everyone treated him as if he just didn't exist. An upgrade from the constant teasing and bullying, Izuku thought to himself. The school days blended together as Izuku continued to research and plan his next mission. Before he knew it, the weekend was there, and he was ready to make his move.
Mom, I'm headed out to take a walk around the city,
Izuku said to his mother as he walked out the door in the early morning light, forcing himself to sound as normal and innocent as he possibly could.
Okay, dear, just make sure you're back home before dinner. I'm making your favorite katsudon bowls, she called back to him.
But the door had already closed behind him. In his bag, he carried everything he thought he might need for his research. A small video camera, drinks and snacks, and a change of clothes if he were to somehow ruin what he was currently wearing. He pulled up the headquarters for the Wild Wild Pussycats and began his walk into the city. He arrived a few hours later, just in time for the last employee to make their way through the door. Izuku sat on a nearby bench and started up his camera, setting it next to him so that it pointed towards the door. Now he simply had to wait and see what happened. A short while later, a tall man left the building dressed in the pro hero outfit of the Wild Wild Pussycats. That must have been Yawara Jitora, also known by the public as Tiger, Izuku thought to himself. He would have to make sure Tiger wasn't around when he attacked Mandalay, as his quirk would allow him to beat Izuku without breaking a sweat. Izuku noted the time and jotted it down in his notebook as Tiger walked past him, nodding and greeting as he continued down the street. Izuku pretended not to notice him, his attention absorbed entirely within his notes. The rest of the day went by with nothing eventful happening. Customers and minor heroes coming in and out of the doors. Soon it was time for the agency to close, and Izuku watched as the star members of the agency went their separate ways. Suddenly an idea popped into Izuku's head. He would follow Mandalay home. Surely she didn't live too far from the agency, since she was probably on call 24/7 in the event of sudden disaster. He quickly packed his gear into his backpack and began tailing the small brown-haired woman. The hour was getting late and the streetlights turned on as the sun set below the horizon and nighttime fell over the city. Mandalay stopped several times, buying magazines and a small bag of groceries before continuing on her way. Izuku noted the times of everything, so that he could review them all over the next couple of days to see if he could establish a pattern. Finally, they arrived at what Izuku assumed to be the neighborhood of the pro-hero. It was a large gated neighborhood full of luxurious houses with expensive cars parked in the driveway. Typical home of an entitled, undeserving hero, Izuku thought to himself. The entire neighborhood was surrounded by a tall brick wall, and the gate was manned by a private security guard monitoring the gates and cameras placed throughout the streets. Izuku made one last note of time she arrived and began his own walk back to his house. It was late when Izuku quietly snuck through the front door of his house. His mom was fast asleep on the couch, the TV channel set to the news. His dinner sat on the table, cold and untouched. He took the bowl to his room so as not to disturb his mother and alert her as to how late it was when he finally returned. He sat down at his desk and began reviewing all of the notes he had taken, and watching the footage for when people entered and left the agency he had been scoping out all day. After making some more brief notes, Izuku fell into a dreamless sleep, exhausted from the long day. The next day was the same as the last. Izuku woke up earlier, leaving before his mother awoke, and once again walked to the Pussycat main headquarters. This time he sat on the bench opposite the street so he wouldn't look as suspicious to anybody who visited the agency yesterday. He had uploaded all of his footage from his camera to his computer before erasing it, and made sure the batteries were fully charged before he left home. He set up everything the same as yesterday, with his notebook and pen out and his camera set facing the agency. Sure enough, at roughly the same time yesterday, Tiger left the building and began his daily patrols. He didn't notice Izuku sitting on the bench on the other side of the street. Izuku once again noted the time and compared it to yesterday's time. The day was once again uneventful, with the usual coming and going of people. At the same time yesterday, Mandalay left the building and began her walk home, and once again Izuku followed her, making notes when she stopped. He didn't follow her all the way home this time, opting instead to head home a little earlier so that he didn't draw suspicion from his mother. Izuku arrived home just as his mother finished setting the table for dinner.
"Where have you been all weekend, Izuku? I feel like I've barely seen you," his mother asked him with a worried tone. "Sorry, Mom. I've just been enjoying the weather. I've been in my room so long I was starting to forget what nature looked like," he joked with her, a smile on his face. His mother was glad to see him smile for the first time since the fight. She finished setting the table and the two had a relaxing dinner together as they talked about Izuku's classes and what he had seen in the city over the weekend. He made sure not to mention where he had actually been. After dinner, he decided to watch TV with his mother before reviewing his notebook and packing his bag for school the next day. Izuku was in a better mood than he had been in a long time. Izuku's good mood was soon ruined when he returned to school and saw Bakugo sitting in the classroom, his arm wrapped in a cast. Bakugo glared at Izuku until the teacher came in and began the class. Izuku left the instant the final bell rang, but he wasn't fast enough. "Oi, Deku!" The anger-filled voice of Bakugo cut through the air. "Wait just a minute!" Izuku froze for a second before turning around. "What do you want, Bakugo?"
he asked through gritted teeth.
"I don't know what exactly you told the police or your mother, but it was all a damn lie and you know it. You provoked that fight by opening your mouth."
Bakugo's hands were already starting to spark.
"You better watch your back, because I'm going to come back stronger, and I'm going to beat you senseless when I do."
The sparks subsided, but the fire in Bakugo's eyes was brighter than ever.
"Sure, whatever you say, Bakugo,"
Izuku said dismissively. He was no longer scared of Bakugo. He knew he could beat him and any of his bully friends that came after him. Izuku still couldn't shake the raw emotion he felt coming from Bakugo on his walk home. The anger and passion he saw in his eyes. If Bakugo really did grow stronger, he wasn't so sure he would be able to beat him if they were to fight again. But he pushed the thought from his mind. It didn't matter. When the world caught wind of what he would soon do, Bakugo wouldn't dare try to fight him, at least not in a fair fight. No, he would make sure that there would never be a second fight to begin with. Izuku sat outside the base of operations for the Wild Wild Pussycats, the cool morning air breeze playing with his hair. He had gotten here a lot earlier than his other days, to give him plenty of time to mentally prepare for what he had come here to do. He checked the time on his watch. This was time for Yawara Chitora, known by his proname Tiger, to come out of the tall building and begin his morning patrol, and so Izuku settled in for the last day of his mission. But Tiger never left. Izuku began to panic, looking back at the notes he had taken to make sure he didn't misread the time. He hadn't. Tiger was supposed to leave the building at the same time every day. Had something happened? Were the Wild Pussycats somehow onto his plan? Had they noticed him sitting outside the past few days taking notes? Had his target, Shino Sasaki, also known as Mandalay, taken notice of him, following her when she left work? He started to consider calling off the mission as doubt and anxiety began to claw at his mind. But then the towering form of Tiger exited the building and started on his usual path down the sidewalk, deeper into the city. Izuku let out a sigh of relief. Tiger walked past him sitting on the bench and nodded his greeting to Izuku like he had before. A few steps past the bench, Tiger stopped and turned around.
Hey, aren't you that kid who's been hanging around here the last few days?
Tiger asked, a spark of curiosity in his eyes.
Oh, hey Tiger,
Izuku had not prepared for this encounter, as Tiger had never really acknowledged him directly. He scrambled to find the words to explain himself. Tiger laughed.
I think I see what's going on here,
he finally said. Panic once again set into Izuku's mind.
You do?
Izuku was prepared to make a quick run for it, worried that his actions during his research had somehow raised the suspicion of the fighting hero.
Of course I do, kid. I am a pro hero after all. Not much gets past me,
Tiger laughed again.
You're dreaming of joining the agency, aren't you? You've been sitting out here scribbling in your notebook, taking notes I imagine well.
He looked Izuku up and down.
You're built well for your age. What's your quirk?
Izuku's attitude darkened considerably at the word quirk. He glared up at Tiger, struggling to contain his rage.
Well, you see, Tiger, I'm quirkless.
Izuku was gritting his teeth, struggling to force the words out in a normal tone.
Oh, I see,
Tiger said, short and to the point.
Well, I hate to be the man who has to break it to you, but it's impossible to become a pro hero without a quirk. You would be better off hanging around the police station. Maybe you can find a civilian job with them. I'm sorry, kid.
His head. Was she off work today somehow? Was she sick? Did Tiger report
rumor about you. Something about you attacking and brutally beating another student. She stopped mid-sentence with a gasp. Izuku had suddenly dropped the bags and rushed at her while she was distracted. The memory of the fight with Bakugo had set him off. Mandalay had just gotten her hands up to defend herself when he threw his first punch. She may be sick, but she was still a pro-hero and was well trained in her reaction time and hand-to-hand combat skill. Mandalay began to back up, blocking the unyielding flurry of blows Izuku was throwing at her. She threw a sharp kick to Izuku's knee, knocking him off balance, before she drove a sharp elbow into his nose, staggering him back towards the doorway. Blood poured from his nostrils and his eyes were watery, but he was prepared for the fight. He had gotten reckless in his rage, but the strike cleared his mind. Mandalay wasted no time in following up her counterattack, throwing a stiff jab towards Izuku's already bloody nose, aiming to stun him again. He stepped to the side, slipping past the punch and threw a hard hook to Mandalay's ribs. She gasped, the wind knocked from her. Izuku stepped forward, shoving Mandalay back before throwing a jab of his own. He landed hard on her nose, snapping her head back and causing her to stumble even more back into the counter. She had nowhere to run now.
Why are you doing this?
Mandalay screamed at him.
I've never done anything to you. What's wrong with you?
Done. He resumed kicking the small, curled-up woman laying at his feet. She cried and screamed as she shrunk even smaller, trying to minimize the damage dealt to her body.
Scum! That's all you heroes are! Do you know what Tiger told me today? He told me that I would never be a hero because I'm quirkless. That's all anyone ever says. But look at me now! I've outsmarted and beaten a pro-hero! You're no stronger than I am!
Izuku let out all of his pent-up feelings and rage at Mandalay. Eventually she stopped crying, the only silence broken by her occasional whimpers. Izuku turned and left, turning the light off behind him, leaving the beaten and broken Mandalay laying alone on the dark floor of the kitchen. He grabbed his bag, which he had left by the door, and ran out. He knew he couldn't go home now. Mandalay would report him to the police, and they would be looking for him. He had to go into hiding and figure things out as he went. He ran back to the rear side of the neighborhood, which bordered a forest. He climbed a nearby tree, using it to get over the tall wall, and sprinted off into the thick underbrush. He had succeeded. He had proven what he had always wanted to prove. He could beat a pro-hero despite not having a quirk. They weren't as strong as they thought.
The police thoroughly swept through the rooms of pro-hero Mandalay's home, but found no one. They had received numerous phone calls from surrounding neighbors, stating that she had sent out a desperate call for help using her telepathic quirk. When the police had arrived, they found the hero laying on the floor of her kitchen, bloody and bruised, softly crying. After some questioning with the security guard at the front gate, they learned that Mandalay had entered the neighborhood with a young man who was helping her carry her groceries. Once the injured hero had recovered some, she revealed that she had been attacked by a quirkless kid named Izuku Midoriya. The sharp knock on the door woke Inko Midoriya from her nap. Sleepily rubbing her eyes, she got up from the couch and opened the front door, squinting against the late afternoon sun at two large figures in the doorway. Standing in front of her was a uniformed officer and a man in a suit with the head of a dog that she immediately recognized as Kenji Suragame, the chief of police.
Miss Midoriya?
He asked, his voice radiating authority, but also concern.
Is your son Izuku home? We need to speak with you both.
Inko shook her head to clear the fog from her mind. Was Izuku home? She didn't hear him come home, but she was asleep. Perhaps he was quiet so that he didn't wake her up.
I'm sorry, I was taking a nap. Let me go see if he's in his room.
Her mind raced as she walked down the dark hallway to Izuku's room. What had he gotten into now? Or was this about the incident with Bakugo? She slowly pushed the door open and peeked inside. No sign of him. Her heart started to pound as she considered the possibilities.
Izuku?
She called out to the empty house.
Are you home?
The silence of the house was deafening to her. She went back to the front room where the officer and Kenji had stepped inside and closed the door behind them.
I'm not sure he's home right now. He left early this morning to take a walk around town, he told me.
She explained.
Please have a seat and tell me what's going on.
The officers gave Inko Midoriya the entire story. After surveying all of the security footage on the cameras outside of the Wild Wild Pussycats headquarters, they discovered that Izuku had been sitting outside every day for the last few days, taking notes and recording the entrance. And then he followed Mandalay to her home every night, always keeping his distance. Footage of the day of the attack showed him entering her neighborhood, and shortly after the police were called. They showed her the pictures of the beaten hero and several captures from the video footage of Izuku just to confirm his identity. Inko sat, quiet and shaking, the tears running down her face. What had caused Izuku to do this? Why was he suddenly so violent and cruel? She felt she was a large part of the blame. Had she not given him enough attention? Had she downplayed his being quirkless? Should she not have given him the weights, the martial arts classes? Was she to blame for the monster that was now roaming the streets of the city?
I have no idea where he could be, Mr. Saragame. I'm so sorry this happened,
she said through her sobs. The tears came freely now.
I don't know where I could have failed as a parent. I tried so hard to give him everything he could need, and it just wasn't enough.
We understand, Miss Midoriya. This isn't your fault,
Kenji explained.
Some people are just inherently evil. We see this kind of situation all the time with small-time villains. People from a loving family and a good home turn bad, just because it's in their nature. We're so terribly sorry you had to find out this way.
The police left shortly after, thanking Inko for her help. She sat alone in the quiet house, crying and staring at the picture of her and Izuku she had placed on the table next to the doorway. He was one of the few lights in her life, and now that light had gone dark. Izuku lay in the grass beneath a large tree deep in the woods on the outskirts of the city, staring at the blue sky above him. His knuckles throbbed, swollen and red from the fight just hours earlier. The police would be on high alert now, scouring every corner of the city in an attempt to find him. They would probably go to his house first. He felt bad for his mother, who would certainly hear the news and be distraught. She didn't understand him or his reasoning for this. She had a quirk, after all. She couldn't possibly hope to understand. Suddenly, the bushes near him started to rustle. Izuku jumped up, ready to fight. He had grabbed a thick branch during his walk through the forest to protect himself if he was attacked. Out of the bushes came a strange-looking man, clad in black and red, a mask and headband covering his eyes and forehead. He had long black hair and a large katana on his back, as well as a knife on his hip. Izuku wasted no time in confronting him.
"You must be one of the heroes sent to capture me,"
Izuku said through gritted teeth. The man seemed surprised to find someone else this deep in the woods.
"Well, you won't take me. I've beaten 2 heroes now, and I won't lose to you."
Izuku immediately rushed the man, brandishing his stick like a sword. The man barely managed to draw his katana when Izuku smashed his weapon into the man's knee. There was no reaction from the stranger, no sign of pain or discomfort. He stared, still confused at the child that was attacking him. Izuku moved to strike the man again, but his attack was met this time by the katana. The sword sliced through his stick like butter, sending most of it flying off into the woods. A hard shove knocked Izuku to his back. This man was definitely more than he would be able to handle. Izuku started to scramble up and run when he felt a slight slicing pain in the back of his leg. He continued to run, afraid of what might happen if this man got a hold of him, but after a few steps his entire body locked up. He fell face first on the cold forest floor, unable to move at all. He heard the footsteps approaching, and knew that he had failed. He would be taken back to the police and charged with his attack, and would be locked in prison for a long time, and carefully monitored even after he got out. Tears began to form in his eyes. He had come so far, just to lose to the semi-strong hero he fought. He really was pathetic. Izuku felt a foot on his arm, and he rolled over onto his back. Standing above him was the man with the katana. He stared down curiously at the boy under him. Then the man crouched down, squatting next to Izuku. He took a deep breath and began to explain who he was.
"My name is Stain, and I am no hero,"
he said slowly. He was careful to explain anything to this kid, in the event his assumption that this kid felt as he did was wrong.
In fact, I'm the opposite of a hero. I'm a villain, but not the kind you typically see on the street or in the news. The media calls me the hero killer, because that's what I do. I hunt down and kill the hero scum.
Izuku's eyes widened at these words. The man was a villain. This man thought heroes were scum, just like he did. He could help him. Teach him to fight heroes and how to hide from the police in public so that he could get his revenge on them. He'd be able to carry out his plans with proper gear and help. The man saw the eyes of the child widen and assumed it was fear.
There's no reason to worry, kid. I'm not going to kill you. You're obviously no hero. If you have the police looking for you, you're probably confused as to why your body isn't responding to you right now. That's because I paralyzed you with my quirk, Blood Curdle. When I taste someone's blood, it paralyzes them. When you tried to run, I cut your leg to stop you.
Izuku began to regain his feeling in his body. His fingers started to twitch, and it wasn't long after that he could move again. He sat up, staring at Stain carefully, his body tensed and ready to run again if he sensed danger. But the man simply stood against a tree nearby, watching him. A short while later, Stain pushed himself off the tree and began to walk off into the forest. Izuku stood up, watching him as he disappeared into the bushes, weighing his options. Finally, he decided to follow the man. Izuku walked for what felt like hours, keeping his distance from the heavily armed man. Finally, he came to a small hut hidden amongst the trees and bushes. It was a simple building, covered in camouflage and dead leaves with boarded-up windows. Stain turned around to face the child.
So, are you deciding to join me?
He yelled to Izuku, who was half hiding behind the trees.
I can teach you how to fight heroes. I can give you weapons. I can show you what I've learned and how I operate. But it won't be easy, and I won't waste time if you fall behind. I have my own agenda.
Izuku stepped out from behind the trees, his bag on his shoulder and the stick in his hand. He nodded and walked up to Stain to stand in front of him. Stain held out his hand, a serious expression on his face. They shook hands, and Stain led him into the hut in the forest. The inside was nothing like the outside. The inside was riddled with technology. Computers and digital maps of the city, alarm systems, cameras in the forest.
The first thing we need to do is get you out of those civilian clothes. The police will be looking for you, and they'll know what you're wearing. You need to cover your face.
Stain started to rummage through a dresser, throwing identical outfits onto the bed behind him. Finally, he pulled out one similar to his, but smaller.
I made this in the event I ever took an apprentice. I guess you can have it. I'm not sure it will fit, but try it on.
Stain handed the outfit to Izuku, who hesitated.
The bathroom is down the hall on the left. I'm serious, try it on. Unless you'd rather go around town matching the exact description the entire city has on you.
Izuku decided that probably wasn't the best idea, and went to change. The outfit fit perfectly, as if it was made for him. He looked in the mirror, checking the various angles to make sure everything fit properly. Then he headed back to Stain.
The red and black suits you well,
Stain chuckled. He gestured to the bed where various swords and knives lay.
Take your pick of weapon, or take all the weapons. So long as you carry them and still move, you're welcome to as many as you want.
Izuku took his time selecting his weapon, test-swinging each sword and knife. None of them felt right in his hand. Finally, his eyes fell on a long metal staff propped up in the corner of the room. He walked over to it as Stain eyed him with curiosity. Izuku took the staff from its rest and spun it a few times, testing its weight and balance. It fit his hand like a glove, and had a decent amount of balanced weight to it. He looked over to Stain for approval to use it. Stain nodded his agreement. Izuku had no need to cut people, as he didn't have a quirk that relied on tasting his opponent's blood.
Now,
Stain said quietly,
let me show you what I do. Oh, Izuku, was it? I have no doubt that you're strong, judging from the bruises and soreness in my leg. But have you ever fought with a weapon before?
Stain didn't sound mad, but almost impressed. Izuku shook his head. The only fights I've been in have been unarmed, even my assault on Mandalay. He felt himself swell with pride at the memory. He had beaten a pro hero, in hand-to-hand combat at that. Sure, she was sick and caught off guard, but she still should have held the advantage.
Your weapon is an extension of your body. Moving and fighting with one should feel as natural as throwing punches and kicks. Otherwise, you leave yourself vulnerable, and against a pro hero, a single moment of weakness is all it will take to put you down.
Stain was always serious. Izuku was convinced he hadn't seen him smile in the last few days of hiding. Izuku spun his metal staff a couple of times, feeling its weight as it silently hummed through the air around him. An extension of his body? The concept was foreign to him. How could this long metal rod ever possibly feel like it was a part of him?
Now, Izuku, I want you to attack me as best as you can. I won't fight back, but I will do my best to avoid and counter your blows. If you can manage to hit me, then I think maybe you'll be ready to come out into the city with me for the next part of your training.
Stain slowly drew his sword from its sheath. It was short for a weapon, especially compared to Izuku's staff, which was about a foot taller than he was. The first trial was over in an instant. Izuku dashed towards Stain, spinning his staff behind him, but in the process he hit his own shin and collapsed in pain. For the first time since their meeting, Izuku heard Stain chuckle.
This is going to be a very long training period if you keep this up,
Stain mumbled from beneath his mask. Izuku stood up, grimacing through the pain in his leg. He got back into his starting position, and they began again. This time, Izuku managed to get his staff into a good position without hitting himself, and swung full force at Stain's head. Stain ducked beneath the blow easily and quickly strafed around Izuku. Izuku turned quickly, bringing the staff with him and swinging again, but again Stain ducked beneath the blow. This continued for a while until Izuku could no longer muster the strength or stamina to swing again, and he fell into the cold, soft grass, panting.
You keep swinging for my head, Izuku. That's too predictable. The attack can be seen coming from a mile away, and you tire yourself out too quickly by putting all of your force into every strike. The only strike that needs that much power is the final one,
Stain explained to the exhausted Izuku.
Try to get me off balance or reeling from other attacks. Attack the joints at extremities, move side to side, throw kicks or try to grab. Fight for position until you feel almost 100% sure that you can land that final blow to end the fight. And then muster up whatever you have left to land it. For now, catch your breath.
Izuku laid in the grass for a few minutes before standing up and stretching. Stain, who was sitting against a tree nearby staring at the sky, looked over at him expectantly. It was time to start again. Izuku took a deep breath before starting this time, focusing on Stain's stance and guard, looking for weaknesses to exploit. It was hard to find any. Stain was an experienced fighter of pro heroes. Every bit of his fighting style and movement was precise, right down to the slight tilt of his head to see around his blade. Izuku dashed forward again, but this time scooped up a handful of dirt and grass and launched it at Stain. He swung through the floating debris, using only half of his staff and aiming lower this time, attempting to hit Stain in his arms or ribs. Stain dodged to the side and easily blocked the attack, but Izuku had thought through this fight. He quickly pivoted, bringing the other half of the staff around his back and swung again. Stain stumbled, but managed to bring his sword around to catch the blow head on. The weight of the metal staff nearly pushed the sword against his body, and he barely maintained enough leverage to shove the staff back. Izuku had him in a good position now. He just had to keep pressing, he thought to himself. He dropped low and pulled the staff with him, causing Stain to suddenly stagger forward from the effort he was putting in to hold the staff back. Izuku threw a sharp kick now to off-balance him, knocking his feet out from under him. Stain landed hard on the grass, and Izuku swung his staff downward with all of his strength. And he hit the grass. Where Stain had just been was now empty space. Stain had rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the blow, and had recovered his posture and stance. Izuku was tired already. Somehow fighting more technical was harder than an all-out assault. The precise movements and constant level changes was more intense, but he wasn't out of the fight yet. Izuku took a deep breath to calm himself once more. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his body, sharpening his senses. The grass trick won't work twice on somebody like Stain. He would have to catch him with something else. He thought back to how Stain had struggled against the weight of the staff, and then came up with another attack plan. Izuku attacked again, bringing his staff down in an overhead strike. Stain attempted to sidestep and defect the blow, but Izuku changed his angle to meet the blade head-on. The force of the strike drove Stain to his knees as he once again struggled against the superior weight of Izuku's metal staff. Stain turned his blade, forcing the end of the staff into the soft earth next to him, but was instantly met with a shattering knee to his chest. The blow forced the air from his body, and he was knocked flat on his back. Izuku stomped on his chest and swung his staff down towards Stain's head like a golf club. Stain closed his eyes. Izuku stopped his attack mere inches away from Stain. The surrounding forest was quiet, save only for their heavy breathing.
Well done, Izuku.
Stain let out a small sigh.
You're an exceptional student. You went from tripping over your own weapon to utilizing the environment and my own weaknesses to achieve victory. However, I wasn't fighting back, and heroes in the world won't be nearly as merciful. Go put on your gear, and we'll go out for a little walk around the city.
The air was crisp in the later hours of the night. Stain and Izuku were perched high above the city on a local office building. Both of them had eyes glued to their binoculars as they scanned the sidewalks below, looking for pro heroes out on patrol. It was a Saturday night, and the streets were crowded with plenty of partygoers and others looking for a nice night out on the town. Stain reached over and tapped Izuku on the shoulder.
Over there by the neon ramen sign, sitting on the bench outside.
Stain whispered. He didn't want to risk any sound-sensitive heroes picking up on their suspicious reconnaissance. Izuku moved his view over to where Stain had mentioned. Sure enough, sitting outside the brightly lit building was none other than Shinji Nishia, known in the pro-hero scene as Kamui Woods. He was currently the 7th top hero, and for good reason. He was small and fast, but still muscular and physically strong. With a powerful quirk and a devastating non-lethal special move, he could use his wooden appendages to trap virtually any would-be villain inside until police or backup arrived. Was this Stain's next target?
We should watch him, see where he patrols, or if this is the area he's chosen to sit and stand guard. After a few nights of this, we can be pretty certain he won't change his routine, and we can find somewhere further away to pick a target.
Stain was cold and calculating, necessary traits to have for someone who usually works alone and against all odds. Izuku admired this about Stain. He was a well-known hero hunter, and yet he still managed to find the perfect openings to strike using his methodical recon and hunting tactics. Izuku was somewhat relieved that Kamui Woods wasn't the next target. He didn't want his first mission to end in complete disaster. The rest of the night passed by without event. Kamui Woods stood up to stretch a few times, and halfway through the night he was brought a bowl of ramen from the shop owner, probably free of charge or payment for protecting the area outside of the shop, Izuku thought to himself angrily. Typical hero. Doesn't even have to pay for his meals, while others struggle day to day not knowing when their next one would be. As the lights around the city began to go out, the pro-hero stood up and began his walk home. Stain and Izuku followed his path, making note of the direction and time it took him to disappear from their view. After he was gone, they both moved to the back side of the building and began their walk back to their base in the middle of the forest bordering the city.
Stop right there!
The shout froze both of them in their tracks. Stain and Izuku slowly turned around, hands on their weapons, to see a tall man wreathed in flame at the entrance of the alley.
Hero killer Stain,
the man grunted.
A parasite on society, and a stain on this city. You're coming with me, and the boy you have with you. I don't know him, but if he's with you willingly, then he's just as worthless as you are.
Izuku pulled out his staff, but Stain put a hand out to stop him. The flaming man stepped into the light. It was Enji Todoroki, the pro-hero Endeavor. Standing at just under 6 feet and 5 inches tall, the man was built like a tank. The number 2 top professional hero. One of the biggest disappointments to the word hero, Izuku thought to himself. Endeavor was cruel, abusive, and had a severely inflated sense of arrogance and disrespect. From what Izuku had heard, his son Shoto Todoroki had been admitted to UA School of Heroes without having to participate in any of the usual recommendation tests. Typical entitled hero family. Seeing one of the highest ranked and honored heroes standing before him made Izuku's blood boil. This man was a scam. He didn't deserve the respect he was given.
I'm only going to ask you once more, Stain. Come with me or things will get very aggressive, very fast.
Endeavor held his hands out. The heat from the idle flames were enough to drive off the cool air.
Izuku, run!
Stain shouted. Izuku wasted no time in turning and sprinting away as fast as his legs would carry him. He heard the shouts of Stain and Endeavor behind him, and the searing heat from Endeavor's attacks. The entire alley was flashing from the flurry of blows that Izuku only hoped Stain was avoiding. He turned just in time to see Endeavor's massive fist smash into Stain's chest, knocking the hero killer clean off his feet and into the nearest building. Izuku's eyes began to tear, but he remembered what Stain had said. He had to get away. He had to get back to the hideout and figure out what to do next. With tears streaming down his face and hatred hotter than Endeavor's flames, he ran alone into the dark embrace of the forest. Izuku sprinted through the thick underbrush, thorns and branches tearing through his clothes and ripping at his skin as tears flowed freely down his face. He didn't know what to do now. His mentor and one of the only people he respected was now in police custody, or even worse, dead. He burst through the door to the small building where he had been hiding, and collapsed to the floor, gasping for air in between sobs. When he had finally regained his composure, he sat up and leaned against the small table Stain had set up for their meals in the main room. He sat there for what felt like eternity, reliving the night's events and trying to come up with a plan on what to do next. He wanted to take revenge on the heroes for what they did to Stain, but without Stain's training and guidance, he knew he didn't stand a chance yet. He stared up through the small skylight on the ceiling, watching the clouds move across the starlit sky. Maybe he should just go home, give up and turn himself in for the things he did, and accept that he would never see the heroes brought to their knees. Izuku was pulled from his thoughts by the sound of heavy footsteps outside. He grabbed his staff and positioned himself next to the door. He wouldn't give up to the heroes without a fight, no matter how futile his efforts were. The door crashed open, hitting the wall so hard it nearly came off its hinges, but no one entered the room. Izuku finally peeked around the corner, but he didn't see the police, the heroes, or anyone in the doorway. Instead, lying on the ground was Stain's unconscious, motionless body. Izuku fell to his knees, throwing his weapon aside before rolling Stain over. His face was smeared with blood, and his body was badly burned. His outfit was in tatters, seared pieces of fabric barely hanging on. Izuku checked his pulse and found only a faint heartbeat. Stain's breathing was shallow and filled with pain. It was a slow and careful process, but Izuku managed to get Stain's injured body into the bed in the small bedroom. He locked all the doors and windows, pulling the curtains closed to keep from drawing any police suspicion to the small cabin in the middle of the forest. He carefully cleaned the blood off of Stain's face and began bandaging the terrible burns that scarred his body. Convinced he had done all that he could, Izuku quickly fell into a restless sleep in the chair on the opposite side of the room. He dreamed of flames engulfing him, and then the feel of cold chains on his wrist in an even colder cell. He was woken by the sounds of Stain coughing and cursing and almost instantly at the bedside. He stood over him, tears welling in his eyes again, waiting for orders on what to do next, but Stain was silent.
I'm glad to see you got away.
Stain finally broke the silence, his voice raspy and seething with anger.
What shitty luck.
Stain! What happened after I ran? How did you get away? I was sure you were...
Izuku trailed off, not wanting to speak the words into existence.
We fought for a while, and I landed a lucky cut to his leg. I was able to paralyze him long enough to escape, but only barely. When the adrenaline wore off, I collapsed in the middle of the forest, and just had enough energy to drag myself to the door.
Stain tried to sit up, but fell back onto the bed, gasping with pain.
The entire city is on high alert now. We won't be going anywhere for at least a week, but given my condition, that may be for the best.
Are you going to be okay, Stain?
Izuku was full of worry. Stain had escaped, but he was still badly injured, and couldn't go to a hospital without being recognized. Stain looked at the amateur bandaging on his body and chuckled.
If this is the best you could do, I'm not so sure. Looks like a week away from the field will be good for you too. You need to learn some new tricks.
The joking demeanor of Stain was unexpected but comforting to Izuku. They sat in the room in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Stain thinking about his next move, wondering what went wrong and how they got caught so easily, and Izuku worrying about Stain's condition and hoping he would be able to do enough to speed up his recovery. It started to rain outside, and soon the sound of the rain on the windows outside lulled them both back to sleep. Izuku woke up before Stain. The early morning light barely streamed through the curtains. It had stopped raining, and the birds were outside chirping happily. If it wasn't for the bandaged body in the bed, he could have convinced himself last night was all just a bad dream. He grabbed a protein bar from the shelf in the kitchen, and his staff from the floor where he had thrown it the night before, and went outside. He ate his breakfast on the front deck of the cabin, listening to the sounds of the forest around him. When he had finished, he picked up his staff and went to a nearby tree. He may have managed to beat Stain in the previous training session, but he still had much to learn about fighting. He positioned himself in front of the tree and imagined the massive figure of Endeavor as he trained. Spinning his staff, he continued to drill, striking the legs and the arms, ducking and weaving around imaginary attacks and countering with his own. He beat at the tree until he could barely move, his muscles aching and his lungs burning. He turned to go check on Stain and saw him leaning against the doorframe watching him.
Your movements are getting better, but you can't fight opponents that don't fight back forever, Izuku.
Izuku noticed Stain's sword in his hand.
Stain, you can't fight right now. You're injured badly. I'm surprised you were even capable of making it out of bed and to the door in your current condition.
Izuku left his training tree and walked over to where Stain was waiting.
I can always fight, kid. Especially against someone as clumsy as you. Living and fighting alone, you learn to heal quickly and get back to work.
Stain pushed himself off the doorframe and drew his sword.
Now we fight for real. Same as before. Try to hit me.
Izuku was hesitant to attack and still exhausted from his solo training on the tree. He didn't want to hurt Stain further, but he was also afraid of the damage Stain might inflict on him. He held his staff out in front of him, shaking slightly. Izuku quickly learned the difference in fighting amateurs and professionals. His previous bouts with Bakugo and Mandalay had been under favorable conditions against inexperienced or weakened opponents. Stain was a professional, and even badly injured, he was more than a match for him. Izuku swung his staff towards Stain, but the staff was deflected effortlessly, and Izuku felt a slight burning in his leg. Stain had slid the staff off the flat of his blade and sliced downward, leaving a shallow cut on Izuku's thigh. It wasn't much more than a scratch, but Izuku felt his body seize up, and he fell to the ground, unable to move. Stain gently tapped him on the head with the point of his sword.
Dead,
he said matter-of-factly.
Stop hesitating, you won't hurt me. In fact, I don't think you'll even manage to hit me.
When the paralysis wore off, Izuku stood back up, stretching out his cramping muscles. He picked up his staff and swung it a few times, and they began again. It was the same story almost every time they sparred. Stain would deflect a few attacks and then, fast as lightning, land a scratch to Izuku and paralyze him. Each time he announced Izuku was dead. Izuku began to feel his confidence drop. If he couldn't do this against an injured solo opponent, how did he ever hope to accomplish his goals? Finally, Stain sheathed his sword.
Fine. I'll fight you unarmed. No quirk, no weapon, same win conditions.
Stain half smirked, half grimaced. Izuku took a deep breath and studied Stain's unarmed fighting position. It was as flawless as when he was armed, almost no holes in his defense. Izuku took a little longer to breathe, and then launched his attack. Stain did his usual dodging around the staff, predicting Izuku's attacks and moving around them. Izuku thrust his staff hard towards Stain's chest in an attempt to catch him off guard, but Stain simply parried the staff aside, stepping in to gain leverage and close distance. He drove his knee hard into the inside of Izuku's thigh, causing his legs to buckle. He tried to sweep Stain with his other leg, but Stain simply stopped it with his foot and then stepped on it, pushing it into the wet ground. He never threw a decisive strike, however. He stood there waiting on Izuku's next move. Izuku swung his staff up towards Stain, trying to break free of his poor position, but his attack was predictable, and Stain simply caught the staff from its weak attack. He pulled back with his other fist. It was over, Izuku thought. He'd lost again. Stain sighed.
You gave up already. The fight isn't over and you've given up. Is that what you plan to do every time you're outmatched? Surrender? You won't make it anywhere if that's the case.
Stain's voice was sharp with disappointment.
You have to plan moves ahead. You can't improvise every step of your fight. You have to make me move where you want, so you can attack how you want. This whole fight, I've been forcing you to attack in ways I can counter, and you've fallen right into it. The thrust into the parry, the knee to force you to buckle into a sweep that was stopped, the desperate swing up to free yourself. That was all my plan, not yours, and you'll never win in a fight where you play into your opponent's plan.
Izuku realized now what Stain was talking about. His attacks had been linear, singular. Throw one attack, it didn't work. Try another attack. Failed. He wasn't stringing anything together. He wasn't forcing Stain to move into positions where he could be hit with other attacks.
But I'm sore and hungry now. Let's go inside and find lunch and get some rest while we plan our next moves.
Stain let go of the staff and stepped off of Izuku's leg before turning and walking to the cabin. Izuku sat there a moment, processing everything Stain had told him and thinking of new ideas to win the next time they fought. He felt like a better fighter already despite losing over and over. Finally, he stood up and followed Stain inside. They spent the rest of the night talking about their lives, the fights they've been in, their parents and families, or lack thereof, their plans for the future and grand ideas. The night went by quickly, and soon they both said their good nights and went to bed. Izuku was happier than he had been in his entire life. He had someone who had shared his ideas and beliefs. He was experienced and willing to train him, and someone he would one day be able to call his partner. He fell asleep, a smile on his face, and slept dreamlessly through the night. He would figure out how to win without a quirk, even if it took him years of hard training and mistakes. He wouldn't give up. He couldn't afford to.
The battered body of Stain weighed heavy in Izuku's mind. What if he didn't recover? What if he was out of the fight permanently? What if he died? He tossed and turned all night, unable to fall asleep without having nightmares of the night of the mission. Endeavor's scorching flames, Stain being knocked into the building, the horrific burns that covered a large portion of his body. Still, in his beaten state, Stain was a tough and efficient teacher, surprising for a man who had never taken an apprentice. Being self-taught, he must have picked up tips and tricks that a lot of people never considered learning. Izuku eventually dozed off into a dreamless sleep, the exhaustion of the training and worrying finally overwhelming his nightmares. When he woke up, Stain was still fast asleep. Izuku stretched and grabbed his staff, but as he headed to the door, Stain's raspy voice surprised him. "Izuku, water." Izuku could barely understand him. His words were so full of pain. Izuku rushed to the kitchen and filled one of the old metal cups with ice and water, bringing it to the bedside. Stain reached out and took the cup, gulping it down thirstily. He coughed a little, but before sighing and laying back down, Izuku stood quietly, waiting on whatever Stain might need. "My throat feels like I've inhaled flames," Stain said, his voice still raspy. He chuckled. "I guess technically I did. Go on, kid. Grab your stuff and go out and train. I'll be okay."
Are you sure, Stain? I can take the day off, help you recover faster, so we can...
Izuku trailed off. He didn't know what the next move was, if there even was a next move.
"I'll be alright, Izuku. You need to train while I lay here and figure out what we're going to do next."
These words brought a small feeling of joy to Izuku. There would be a next plan. Another attempt to knock the heroes from their high pedestal. He picked his staff back up and left the cabin, stepping out into the frigid morning air. There was a light dusting of frost on the grass, and the birds had just begun their singing. Izuku took in the morning scenery, and then walked to the tree where he had been training. He visualized Stain from the night before, his stance, his movements, and he began planning his attack patterns. Middle swing to a low thrust, a feinted overhead, turning the staff and striking the temple with the other side. He even practiced running at his target, grabbing a handful of dirt and throwing it before attacking to stimulate his distraction technique. Stain watched from the window, observing the kid's movements. He was fast, and his attacks carried weight and power. But he was still lacking the killer instinct that truly made a warrior. Was it his age, his lack of training, his lack of real-world experience? It didn't matter. He would gain all of these with time, assuming he survived. Stain hoped he would survive. Someone needed to carry on his legacy, his mission, and his creed. After the run-in with Endeavor, he wasn't sure how much longer he would live. Izuku trained until the sun was high and his body wouldn't move anymore. He fell onto the grass and stared up at the trees above him, the afternoon light dancing through the leaves. Not only did he need to work on his fighting skills, he needed to train his body to endure prolonged operations. He also needed to improve his survival and reconnaissance skills, if he ever hoped to operate outside of Stain's guiding hand. He was overwhelmed by the amount of work he would need to put in to get where he wanted to be. Quirkless. The word rang out in his mind. That alone made his entire goal feel unreachable. The loud growl of his stomach pulled him from his train of thought. He forgot to grab breakfast before training, and now he was starving. Izuku pushed himself from the grass, turning to see Stain leaning on the doorway, watching him intently. He shook a brown paper bag.
"You forgot your lunch, dear."
Stain chuckled.
"But honestly, you shouldn't train on an empty stomach. It's not good for your body or your mind, and you'll notice you're slower."
Izuku ran to the stairs and grabbed the bag from Stain. The Stain was a basic lunch. A ham sandwich, a banana, and a bottle of water. Hardly a lavish lunch, but it would be enough to keep his energy up and his stomach from growling. He sat on the stairs and ate his lunch, enjoying the warm sun and feeling of freedom. A life without strict rules or times. He did pretty much what he wanted. The weeks passed by quickly. With Izuku training and taking care of Stain, and as Stain's strength recovered, he began to join Izuku in the training. At first, it was only common suggestions on Izuku's fighting style. Sometimes Stain would sit in the shade of the trees and meditate. Izuku asked him once what he was thinking about, and only got a small smirk.
One day I'll tell you. I don't think you would understand just yet.
The wounds on Stain finally healed, and he gained all of his strength. It was time to test the kid again. If his prediction was correct, he would be more than ready for the test he had devised for him. They woke up early, just as the sun was barely peeking above the horizon. Stain grabbed his gear and put it on, and told Izuku to do the same.
What are we gearing up for?
Izuku was excited for the new mission, but in the early morning, would they not be spotted?
We're going to fight, but this time we're going to do it as if our lives depended on it. You need to experience the adrenaline and tactics that come with real-world situations.
Stain glared at Izuku from behind his mask. Izuku felt his blood turn to ice. An actual fight? As if his life depended on it? What if he wasn't ready? His hands were shaking as he was putting on his gear and grabbed his staff. Would Stain really kill him? Not sure. What if he did? They stepped outside and made their way to the clearing that they had trained in so many times before. They took their positions across from each other, and the training began. Stain drew his sword and assumed his fighting stance. Izuku held his staff in front of him. The tip pointed at Stain's forehead. Stain had given him this tip during training, saying that if he kept his weapon pointed at his target, it would be harder for them to predict feints, and therefore easier for him to land blows.
Begin,
Stain said coldly, before seemingly vanishing from Izuku's eyes. Izuku's adrenaline instantly kicked in, his eyes scanning around him, looking for any sign of where Stain might have gone. He had no idea where he was. He had no idea he was this fast when he wanted to be. Then he saw it. A small amount of grass kicked up from the ground to his right. Moving rapidly behind him, he waited, forcing himself to pretend he didn't see the movement. If Stain knew he was onto him, he might change his tactics and catch him off guard. He heard the soft crunch of the frosty grass behind him.
Behind you!
Stain's attempted surprise attack was cut short as Izuku spun around quickly, ducking and swinging his staff at Stain's knee. Stain was not prepared for the quick reactions, barely managing to block the low strike. Izuku quickly swung the other end of his staff up, aiming for Stain's non-dominant arm. Stain leapt back, the whistle of the staff barely missing him. Izuku wasted no time in continuing his assault, rising up and throwing a small rock at Stain. Stain distinctively covered his eyes, expecting the usual dirt and grass trick Izuku had used many times before. The rock bounced off him harmlessly, but when he dropped his hand, Izuku was gone. He looked around wildly, completely bewildered by the new tactics the kid was using.
Behind you,
Izuku said quietly, before slamming his staff into Stain's exposed back. The sudden force slamming him knocked Stain onto his face, but Izuku was fighting for his life, as he was told. He wasted no time in bringing his staff down hard, aiming towards the back of Stain's head. But Stain's fighting instinct saved him, as he rolled to the side, just in time to avoid a fatal strike. He slashed out with his blade when something bizarre happened. Izuku caught the blade with his hand. It cut deep into the fleshy part of his palm, but he didn't let go. He drove his knee hard into Stain's face, snapping his head back. He grabbed Stain by his hair with his free hand and kneed him again.
if you can't get your blade to your mouth to taste the blood, you can't paralyze me. It hurts, but I won't lose again,
Izuku said through gritted teeth. Izuku pulled back for another knee, but Stain let go of the sword, grabbing Izuku's leg and sweeping him off his feet. He grabbed the kid by his throat and threw a hard punch for his nose, but he was still stunned from the knees and the sudden change in pace of the fight, and Izuku slipped past the punch, catching Stain's arm and using his knee to throw Stain over him. He rolled over and grabbed Stain's blade. The weapon felt foreign in his hand, lighter than his staff, and the handle didn't sit well in his palm. He quickly pointed the tip at Stain's throat.
Surrender, or I'll kill you,
Izuku said, out of breath and shaking with adrenaline. Stain held his hands up.
Good job, kid. You win.
But Izuku didn't lower his weapon. What if this was a trick? How could he know?
No, seriously, you beat me fair and square. I'm honestly impressed. Your fighting skills and tactics have improved massively since last time. You might be able to even give a pro hero a run for his money.
Stain slowly stood up, his hands still raised. The bloody tip of the sword followed Stain as he stood up. Stain was gone in an instant. Confused as to how someone so beaten could still move so fast. He looked everywhere, but couldn't find him.
Izuku!
Stain's voice rang out from the doorway of the cabin.
I'm 100% serious. You won. Come on, get some food. Let's plan our next training. Maybe start bandaging up that gashed hand.
Izuku looked down at the large gash in his hand and suddenly felt dizzy. As the adrenaline began to wear off, a searing pain spread through his arm. He rushed quickly to the cabin. Stain showed him how to properly disinfect and bandage a wound, as well as how to make sure nothing important, like nerve endings, were severed. After his wound had been bandaged, they sat down to talk about what other training Izuku needed.
It's not enough to be able to fight. When you're in the field, you need to know how to move unseen, find food, and take care of any injuries or damaged equipment that may arise. These things won't be as hard, as it's mostly memory and repetition. I say we give it another week, for the city to calm down and for both of our wounds to completely heal. After that's all finished, and I think you're ready for it, we'll start making more runs into the city to gather information and decide on our next target.
They ate a small dinner in peace, and Izuku went to bed feeling better than he had ever felt since he left home. The next few weeks passed by easily for Izuku. He ventured out into the forest with Stain day after day, learning what plants were safe to eat and which plants were poisonous, what gear was essential to bring for survival, how to hunt animals and prepare them to eat, how to build a fire to keep warm, and how to clear the fire so that no one would know that he was there. Through trial and error, and with Stain's guiding hand, Izuku became a competent survivalist. The last night of his training, Izuku and Stain sat around a small fire deep in the heart of the forest.
Izuku, I want to discuss our next plan.
Stain's voice dropped, which only happened when he wanted to talk about something serious. Izuku reveled in the way he said our next plan. They were a team now.
The Top Academy Hero School, UA, is hosting a sports festival soon. A competition where the heroes in training will demonstrate their newfound skills and improvements since they started. I want to go and make an announcement. I want to let UA and all those attending know that they are not safe, that the hero killer is still alive and healthy, and still out for blood, and I want you to go with me.
Stain's tone was full of bitter confidence.
Stain, the festival will be heavily monitored and guarded by most, if not all, the pro heroes. Getting in, making a public announcement so threatening, and managing to escape without being caught will be incredibly difficult and dangerous. Not to mention Endeavor will be there too.
Izuku had flashbacks to the first encounter with the Fury pro hero, and he shuddered to think he may have to relive that.
Alone, yes, it would be a suicide run.
Stain shrugged and continued.
But I have an apprentice with me now. Someone who can help plan and who can fight if things go wrong. With the two of us, I think we can pull it off.
Izuku nodded, and they sat by the fire in silence, each contemplating their mission. Stain wouldn't be able to make the announcement in person. He would be swarmed instantaneously by every pro hero in attendance. He would need a way to broadcast it. Maybe over the loudspeaker, or on the large broadcasting screen on the sports field. But that would still be difficult to manage, since UA Sports Festival had some of the tightest security of any school event. But the idea of letting the heroes know they were never safe, and that their careers could end in the blink of an eye, made Izuku tremble with excitement. No matter how dangerous, they had to try. When Izuku woke up, Stain had already mostly cleared the camp, and he was packing up their gear for the return trip home. It was a quiet walk down the familiar path, both of them still deep in thought about how to approach the crashing of the sports festival. When they made it back to the small cabin, Stain threw the gear by the door and pulled out a crudely drawn map of the UA campus.
I've been scouting the school for years, noting weaknesses in the surrounding walls and buildings, tracking patrol routes and class schedules, and mapping the outer areas. I've even snuck in a few times, risking being discovered in order to better understand the layout of the grounds.
Stain had obviously been wanting to do this for a while now, and now maybe he had the team to do it with.
The sports festival will be held here in this large arena separate from the main campus.
Stain pointed to the large dome-shaped building.
However, I believe a lot of the broadcasting is done from here in a separate viewing booth from the top of the stadium.
He pointed again, this time to a small rectangle drawn at the northmost end of the dome structure.
If we can scale the outside of the building to the top of the broadcasting booth, we should be able to get inside while avoiding most of the security. The biggest issue, however, is the announcer is the pro hero, President Mike. We'll need to take him out in order for me to make the announcement without interference.
Stain smirked and continued.
We can catch him unaware and paralyze him with my quirk and make my announcement while he's helpless.
It was a solid plan, but the hardest part would be scaling the massive arena without being seen, and escaping without being captured, as pro heroes would certainly be rushing to the announcer's booth as soon as Stain started his speech. It would be up to Izuku to keep a lookout, and potentially deal with any threats that arise before the mission was complete. He was afraid, excited, nervous, but also driven by the shared desire to scare the heroes and remind them that they're not invincible and can die just like any other person. They spent the rest of the day and most of the night going over all the heroes in attendance, including the strongest students, and how to best deal with them if they were to arrive. Endeavor's notes only had a single word: run. In the following days, Stain trained Izuku with the tools they were going to use for the up-and-coming mission. Specialized claws that slid over the fingers, designed to dig into and grip the surface of all but the smoothest materials. They started with trees in the forest, and later on scaled the highest buildings on the outskirts of town at night. The constant climbing put a strain on Izuku, pushing his muscles and the mind to their limits as he climbed up hundreds of feet. No lifeline to save him if he fell. The buildings on the outskirts were worn, and on several occasions the weathered material broke under the claws, forcing him to tangle by one hand as he tried to find another handhold. Stain reassured him this wouldn't happen at the festival, because UA put massive amounts of money into making sure their buildings were the highest quality material. Early in the morning, before the sun started to shine through the horizon, Stain woke Izuku from his sleep. The gear was packed up. The map had been studied, the notes on the heroes had been memorized, and now all that was left was to execute the plan. Stain and Izuku stepped out from the outskirts of the forest. The early morning light revealed the silhouette of a towering arena. News reporters and their crews were already outside with the vans from all over the city parked outside the main entrance. Stain motioned for Izuku to follow, and they skirted around the arena until they were positioned behind the buildings, away from the reporters' cameras. They slipped on their climbing gear and began the lengthy climb up the massive wall. The sun was climbing higher when they finally reached the slanted portion of the dome, and could now stealthily walk up the side, being careful not to slip on the smooth mirrored glass that covered the peak. Once they reached the overhang that looked out over the arena, they lay down to catch their breaths and monitor the situation. The festival had just begun, President Mike's booming voice giving commentary to the events unfolding below. As the heroes in training ran through an obstacle course for their first event, Izuku scanned around with his binoculars, searching for one person in particular. Finally, he saw him, near the front of the race. Gatsuki Bakugo, his lifelong bully and first person he had beaten, was running almost neck and neck with Shoto Todoroki, Endeavor's son. Izuku clenched his binoculars tighter, rage pulsing through his body. One day Bakugo will get what he deserved, what all heroes deserved. The race finished, and the next event started. A cavalry-style game of tag between various groups of students. Izuku scanned around the crowd, searching for the massive frame of Endeavor. After sweeping the crowd multiple times, he couldn't find him. He nudged Stain.
Stain, I don't see Endeavor anywhere in the crowd. Do you think he's even here?
Izuku was relieved, glad to not see the powerful hero among the heroes. But his heart sank quickly at Stain's reply.
He could be guarding the booth or roaming the arena inside on patrol. His pride and joy, Todoroki, is competing today, and I find it hard to believe he wouldn't be here.
Stain's voice had a hint of worry to it. No doubt he was still shook up by his encounter last time. The cavalry tag battle ended, and a concrete square was raised in the center of the arena. President Mike announced that the final event was a one-on-one duel with other students, in a tournament-style elimination series. This is when Stain decided to make his move. Stain nudged Izuku and motioned him to follow, and they quickly dropped from the overhanging onto the announcer's booth. They both peeked over either of the sides of the booth, checking for guards or heroes, but the entire arena around them was empty. Stain and Izuku dropped down in front of the door inside, and waited for President Mike to finish his announcements before making their move inside. Stain slowly pushed the door open and looked inside. There was a police officer sitting on the back of the room, and President Mike was standing at the large glass window, watching the event unfold below him. Stain motioned to Izuku to take out the guard on his move. President Mike's booming voice began to commentate on the battle below, and Stain swung the door open and dashed in. Izuku followed close behind, his staff in hand, and swung it full force at the unsuspecting guard. The staff connected with a hard crunch, and the officer slumped to the floor. Izuku looked over to see Stain, standing behind President Mike, with his sword drawn. After his announcement, President Mike turned around. "I thought I heard someone come in." He stopped short. Before he could process the hero killer who stood before him, Stain cut a deep gash into the hero's chest and instantly paralyzed him. President Mike fell to the ground, gasping for air and trying desperately to move. Izuku knocked him unconscious with a quick swing of his staff, worried that he may still find a way to alert the heroes to their attack. Stain nodded in his agreement at the action and stepped up to the microphone. He watched as the heroes in training fought below, testing their skills, training to one day become the over-worshipped scum that were heroes. If he could, he would level this entire school. It was nothing but a monument to the elite. The duel below ended, and the crowd was getting nervous, casting glances at the booth, waiting on President Mike to make an announcement as to which students would fight next. Instead, Stain tapped the mic a few times before speaking.
Listen well, heroes.
Stain's voice was cold and deep, the words full of rage and hatred.
The hero killer walks among you, even here in this secure arena, guarded by heroes and police alike. You are not safe. No one is safe from my blade, and no one is safe from death.
He stepped away from the microphone and slowly began walking to the door. His announcement made, the mission completed. All that was left now was to escape. Izuku looked down at the crowd of people, all stunned by the announcement. And then the panic set in. People began rushing for the exits, pushing and shoving and screaming. Izuku turned to follow Stain, when suddenly a hero came crashing through the window of the announcer's booth. Izuku and Stain turned quickly, preparing to fight Endeavor. But crouching on the other side of the room was Katsuki Bakugo? Katsuki Bakugo stood up from his crouched position on the other side of the room. He glared over at Izuku and Stain, and then froze. "Deku, what are you doing here?" His hand, still smoking from the blast that launched him up to the announcer's booth, moved to a scar across his nose. Stain stepped forward. "Izuku, how do you know this kid? Is he the bully you told me about before you ran away?" He drew his sword and started to walk towards Bakugo. "Don't worry, this won't take but a second." Izuku held up his hand to stop Stain, his grip on his staff tightening. This was his fight, at the moment he had been waiting for ever since he started his training. "No, Stain. Let me take this fight. I'm ready." He lowered himself into his fighting stance, his staff held out in front of him. He already knew Bakugo's fighting style, and with his new training and weapon, he should have no problem reminding the scum of their last encounter. Bakugo let out a low growl, his hands sparking furiously. "You idiot! You useless, trustless mongrel! When I woke up in the hospital to find out that not only had you attacked me, but another pro hero, I knew I had to get my revenge on you. But the idea that you would join up with the hero killer himself, do you have a death wish? You're quirkless. You won't even stand a chance against heroes." He smirked and shrugged. "Whatever. I'll take you both down here and now and gain the recognition of every hero agency in this city." Izuku charged Bakugo, the one word sending him over the edge. Quirkless. How many times had he heard that now? He was tired of it being used as an insult for him. Quirkless or not, he was someone that should be feared. Bakugo held out his hands, the sparks turning to flames, and an ear-shattering explosion rang out from the room as he let loose a full-power volley of explosions that approached Izuku. But Izuku had already expected Bakugo to go for the easy, straightforward attack. It seemed his training time at UA did little to improve his strategic thinking. Izuku slid under the blast, sweeping Bakugo off his feet with his staff as he moved past him. He spun around, swinging his staff down at Bakugo, who was now on his back. But Bakugo had learned some new tricks as well. From his prone position, he blasted himself across the floor, catching himself against the wall with his feet before rolling over and launching himself at Izuku at an almost untraceable speed. Izuku had only seen such speed from Stain during training, wasn't prepared when Bakugo full-force flying tackled him onto the wall behind him. The impact knocked Izuku's breath from his lungs, and he dropped his weapon. Bakugo held his hand inches from Izuku's face, the smell of gunpowder filling his nostrils. Die, scum! Bakugo yelled as his hands sparked once more, and he launched a concentrated blast point blank into Izuku's face. All that was left was a gaping hole in the wall where Izuku had been before. Smoke and rubble filled the room. Bakugo turned, prepared to fight Stain and finish this fight. He was met with a crushing punch to the face. He staggered back, tears swelling in his eyes and his ears ringing from the powerful blow. He strained his eyes, trying to see through the blurry tears and smoke in the room, but he couldn't see where the attack had come from. Through the smoke came a leg, kicking him hard in the stomach. Bakugo doubled over. The air knocked from him, and he was immediately met with a thundering knee to his scarred nose that knocked him clear off the ground. The smoke had started to clear, and standing over him was Izuku, his face covered in blood and ash. In the moment just before the blast, he had rolled to the side, dodging most of the damage and hiding himself in the resulting smoke and chaos. "Why won't you just die, worm?" Bakugo gigged out at Izuku, rolling over and throwing more blasts as he stood up. The room was once again filled with smoke. Bakugo looked around wildly, trying to find the quirkless runt who had scarred him in their previous battle. The thick smoke obscured almost all vision in the room as he searched for any sign of Izuku. He had to finish this fight quickly, before the pro hero showed up and stole the glory from him. Bakugo felt a tap on his shoulder, and he spun around, blasting furiously. The entire wall behind him was now reduced to dust, and the smoke cleared quickly. Izuku watched as Bakugo blasted wildly, attacking through the smoke at anything he perceived as a threat. He grabbed his staff and slammed it onto Bakugo's back. He had to finish this fight quickly before the pro heroes arrived and captured him and Stain. Bakugo fell to his knees, caught off guard from the impact behind him. Izuku swung his staff again, a crunching blow square on the defenseless Bakugo's temple. He crumbled to the ground, his entire body going limp as he was knocked unconscious. All that was left was the unconscious bodies of two heroes. Stain and Izuku were nowhere to be found. The entire stadium was on high alert, with police and pro heroes running all through the corridors and surrounding the outside perimeter. Izuku and Stain had to make their escape quick, or risk being captured as they rapidly descended the back wall. The climb down was much easier than the climb up, as they rappelled down the ropes they had left on the top. The moment their feet were on solid ground, they sprinted for the trees, eyes scanning the skies around them for any signs of pursuit. Once they had gotten a safe distance away, they both collapsed onto the cool ground. The smoke from the fight in the announcer's booth could be seen billowing high into the sky. They lay in silence, both trying to catch their breath and still listening for any sounds of pursuit. Stain was the first to move.
"We did it, Izuku. We infiltrated one of the most secure events in the UA calendar and made statements against the parasites that are the pro heroes and their training school."
Stain's voice had a tinge of excitement and pride to it that Izuku had never heard before, but he did not respond. Once they were sure they had not been followed, they slowly began to walk back to the cabin. Izuku did not speak. He was lost in deep thought as the fight and the events of the day. He ran through every step of the mission over and over again in his head. The climb up the building, the ambush on President Mike, Stain's announcement, Bakugo's dramatic entrance, the fight between them, the escape. It didn't go as smoothly as it could have, but it was for the most part unproblematic. He wondered what they would do next, and he questioned his abilities. Bakugo had given him a good bit of trouble, despite all of his training. Had it not been for Bakugo's rage and uncontrollable attacks, he might have gotten the best of him. And that was only a hero in training. Would he really ever stand a chance against an actual pro hero? When they arrived back at the cabin, they were met with an unexpected sight. The entire building was surrounded by the police. Their gear, maps, plans, everything was laying outside. Towering over all the officers was him, Endeavor. The flames surrounding him threatened to start a forest fire, his intense eyes scanning the entire area around the cabin. Stain cursing under his breath, which means I have no choice but to go seek their help. Damn it all. Stain was visibly frustrated. He nudged Izuku and led him in another direction, headed towards the outskirts of the city where they had practiced scaling the buildings. Izuku knew better than to ask questions when Stain was in a bad mood. He knew they would be answered when they got wherever they were going. The walk was long, and eventually they had reached the building Stain was looking for. It looked like any other building in their area, run down and abandoned, a relic from the past where this part of the city was a bustling office space. Stain walked up to the front door of the building, looking around suspiciously as he neared the entrance. He knocked 3 times. The door cracked open, and a short blonde girl around Izuku's age peeked through.
Oh, it's you, Stain. Have you brought me any samples?
Her gaze drifted over to Izuku, and she quickly slammed the door. Her muffled voice could barely be heard from the other side.
You've been followed. It looks like you've gotten sloppy, Stain. Deal with him.
Stain sighed and knocked again.
He's with me, Toga. Open the damn door already. They found my hideout.
The door cracked open again, but this time a man peeked out. Izuku couldn't see his face. It was covered with a hand.
Stain, who is this kid? Have you finally gotten soft and taken an apprentice?
The man's voice was quiet and calm, but it oozed with ill intent and power. Stain's irritation began to show.
Shigaraki, this isn't the best time for introductions. Endeavor and the police have found my hideout, and I'm not sure if they're on our trail. This is Zuku, yes, is my apprentice. I'll explain more if you just let me in.
The man opened the door for Stain, his gaze piercing through Izuku as they entered the abandoned building. The main room resembled an underground bar. The lights dim, the TV on but muted, various shady characters sitting around the counter. They all turned to look at the open door. Izuku kept his mask on and his head down while Stain explained to the crowd the events of the morning. They listened intently, nodding their heads in approval, some of them shouting at the exciting parts. When Stain had finished, the man with a hand on his face quieted down the crowd.
No doubt you're both very tired, then. Toga will show you where you can stay, and feel free to hide out here as long as you'd like. Also, welcome to the League of Villains.
The blonde girl named Toga showed Stain and Izuku to a room at the end of a long hallway. Izuku collapsed onto the bed, sighing and pulling off his mask. Izuku turned and looked at Stain.
The League of Villains? How come you've never mentioned them before? This would be more than enough of a team for you to accomplish whatever plans you came up with. We could easily crush the pro heroes with this many villains.
Stain sat down, his shoulders slumping.
I didn't mention them because they don't understand my methods or my creed. I want to crush the heroes because they don't deserve the respect and the money and fame they get for doing their job. And they don't use that to their advantage to flaunt their perceived superiority over everyone else. But the League,
They want to crush the heroes so that they can take their place as rulers of the world. They're honestly no better than the heroes when it comes to their motive, but they're the only people in this city who will help me right now. So I have no choice but to work with them.
Izuku nodded in understanding and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the League. Soon, the exhaustion from the exciting day overtook him, and he fell into a deep sleep. Thank you, friend. Izuku woke up in an unfamiliar bed, in an unfamiliar room, with an unfamiliar face hovering over him, staring. He let out a gasp and grabbed his staff, which he had become accustomed to keeping at his side while he slept. The blushing girl with blonde hair grabbed his hand to stop him. It's okay. Don't panic. Her voice was high-pitched, but calm. You were tossing and turning and crying out in your sleep, and I was just checking in to make sure everything was okay with you and Master Stain. Izuku jerked away from her as his senses came back to him. He was in the back of the bedroom of the League of Villains hideout, after the police and heroes found the hideout he and Stain had been hiding at. This girl, around his age, was Himiko Toga, he recalled. Her quirk allowed her to use blood samples to shapeshift into a perfect image of whoever's blood she drank. I'm fine. Izuku stuttered, still cautious and wary of this girl. If what Stain had told him about the League of Villains was true, these people weren't exactly to be trusted. I was just having a nightmare about a fairly recent run-in with Endeavor. Togo sat at the foot of his bed and tilted her head, curiously. I run in with that man? Master Stain didn't mention that at all last night. What happened? Toga's voice leaked with excitement, and she was still blushing. Did she always blush this much? I'd rather not talk about it. Sorry, Toga. It's not something I'd like to think about. Izuku was only telling half the truth. He also didn't want her or the other villains to know that he was quirkless, or that he was too weak to save Stain in a moment of need. Oh, boo, you're no fun at all. But okay, I'll respect your secrets for now. She blushed more and got up to leave. She stopped in the doorway and turned around. Oh, by the way, I left some breakfast on the table outside for you and Master Stain when he wakes up. I hope you guys like it. She closed the door behind her and made her way back to the hall, back to the main room. Izuku laid in bed and thought about their situation, their hideout, plans, and most of their gear were in the hands of the police now. What could they do? Anything they might try would probably already be prepared for, and with Endeavor on the hunt, it was only a matter of time before they ran into him again. He shuddered at the thought of facing him again. Even with his training, he knew he stood no chance against the raw, natural power of the number 2 pro hero. Stain rolled over and stretched.
You could have told her about Endeavor, Izuku. These people may not have our motives or our methods, but they're still villains all the same. We don't have to worry about them betraying us.
Stain had been awake the moment Toga had entered the room, his survival instincts forcing him to prepare for an ambush.
Honestly, at this point, we're probably going to have to team up with them until Endeavor is taken down. We can't safely be on our own until then.
Izuku was now even more troubled at this thought. They had to work with the League of Villains? They had no choice but to one day fight Endeavor? What if he lost Stain? What if the entire League of Villains were destroyed except for him? How would he carry out the rest of his mission on his own? Would he have to flee the country and find other like-minded villains? He shook his head to clear the thoughts from his head. He would discuss it with Stain after breakfast. Izuku and Stain had breakfast in silence. The eggs and bacon were delicious, and much appreciated change of pace from breakfast bars and mixed nuts he had become accustomed to eating out in the forest hideout. When they finished, Stain donned his gear and made for the door. Izuku stopped him. Master Stain, where are you going? Izuku cursed Toga for drilling the title before the name in his brain earlier. He knew Stain would mention it, but the question remained valid. It wasn't safe for Stain to leave, especially after the trauma that unfolded yesterday.
Master Stain, I see you and Toga are already getting along well. I'm going to scout the old hideout, but I want you to stay here and talk to some of the other members of the League of Villains. Specifically Shigaraki and Kurogiri, as they're the ones in charge of the operations that go on around here. I should be back before sundown, but don't worry if I'm not. I have no intention of starting anything soon.
Stain walked out the door and down the hall, leaving Izuku worried for his safety and nervous to meet the other members alone. Izuku sat alone in the room for a little while longer, cleaning up and organizing what little belongings they had to make the room feel more like home. For some reason, his thoughts drifted to his mother. He had left her alone without saying goodbye. He knew she would have never understood his anger towards the heroes, his hatred. He didn't leave because he didn't love her, quite the opposite. He didn't want his mother to see him do the things that he knew he had to do, and he didn't want to get her involved with the dangers that came with all of the fighting between heroes and villains. When he finished his cleaning, he took a deep breath and headed down the hall to the bar. It was surprisingly quiet and empty compared to the crowd that was lurking about at his arrival last night. When he entered the bar, there were only 3 villains around. Kurogiri stood at the bar, washing glasses and wiping down the bar. Shigaraki sat at the bar, the hand now removed from his face, to reveal thirsty red eyes and missing lips. And finally, Toga danced around the room, singing about killing heroes and drinking their blood to hide or something. Izuku couldn't really understand her. Izuku took a seat at the bar, a few spaces down from Shigaraki. He couldn't explain the feeling, but the silent power the man gave off made him especially nervous. Kurogiri stopped cleaning and walked over to him. "Young Izuku, would you like a drink? Perhaps a beer or maybe something stronger?" Before Izuku could raise the question of his age, Kurogiri laughed. "I'm joking, kid, here." He opened the fridge behind him and handed Izuku a small bottle of orange juice.
Thank you. You must be Kurogiri? Stain said he wanted me to talk with you about the League of Villains while he was out scouting.
Izuku took a sip from his drink before continuing.
What exactly is the goal? The mission we hope to accomplish? Why are we here and not fighting?
At these questions, Shigaraki sighed and put the hand back on his face before walking out of the room, and Togo had stopped dancing, opting instead to take the seat next to Izuku and stare at him. "The mission?" Kurogiri started. "The mission is simple. We're going to kill All Might, and whichever hero is brave enough to take his place as the top hero. And once we've crushed the heroes down to their last hopes, we'll start our own world, one where power is valued over everything." Toga clapped her hands and squealed in delight before spinning herself around in the chair, laughing maniacally. All Might? Izuku sat and thought quietly. All Might was a household name, truly the scummiest of all the heroes. He had merchandise galore, with action figures, posters, t-shirts, movies, TV shows, monuments, everything that came with being the #1 hero. The news frequently had interviews and replayed footage of All Might besting villains, blasting with his quirk and laughing, all while giving speeches about how everyone was safe so long as he was around. It made Izuku sick.
Kurogiri, you said the mission was simple, but I'm not so sure taking out All Might is what anyone would call simple. Do we have a plan? Do we have numbers and equipment and strategies?
Izuku had so many other questions, but those were best saved for Stain. He didn't want to offend the people he was currently being forced to work with. All will be revealed in time, young Izuku. This isn't the time for planning. For now, I suggest relax and recover from your recent mission. Get to know the people here, their quirks and attitudes, so that you may form a better team bond with them to aid you in the events ahead. Kurogiri was back to wiping down the bar. For example, my quirk is fairly basic, yet vital to our operations. Suddenly a fog appeared behind Kurogiri, and he stepped into it. The voice was now behind Izuku, who whooped around in surprise. Kurogiri was standing behind him. I can create these portals to any location I desire, so long as I know its exact location. I can create multiple of them, and this is incredibly important to the League for purposes of transportation and ambush. Also, I don't mean to boast. I have a naturally sharp mind that is endlessly useful to the planning and execution of said ambushes. He walked back through the portal, teleporting behind the bar. Izuku was dumbstruck. Such a tool would have been a godsend for the missions he and Stain had conducted. Izuku nodded his understanding and turned to Toga, who was now stumbling around dizzy from her spinning, still giggling.
Toga, I know you can turn into other people using their quirk, but I was wondering, does that mean you can also use their quirks?
Izuku had wanted to ask earlier, but his cautious nature and wary opinion of the girl had stopped him. Toga stopped and turned to him, frowning.
No, I can only assume their form, but that doesn't mean I'm not useful. I use my quirk to gather information, and even sow distant among these heroes by creating drama and rivalries while pretending to be one of them.
She giggled again.
Nothing is more fun than watching these heroes argue about things they never actually said, all because of what I did. Not to mention, I'm a very competent fighter. Maybe one day I'll show you.
She winked at him. Izuku realized this girl was far more dangerous than he had originally thought. Suddenly, Izuku felt a hand on his shoulder, and a burning sensation spread through him. He turned to see the hand face of Shigaraki mere inches away from him.
Little young Izuku, I hope you're enjoying your stay here with us. Allow me to introduce myself as well.
Izuku let out a scream as the burning sensation spread throughout his entire body. It felt as if his insides were being boiled by his blood. Himiko and Kurogiri watched in silence as the young boy struggled to get away from Shigaraki's grasp. Shigaraki removed his hand, and Izuku collapsed to the floor, writhing in pain as his body continued to burn.
I am Tomura Shigaraki, and I have run this little operation we have going on here.
His voice was calm and cold.
I had heard that Stain had picked up an apprentice, but I had no idea he was some quirkless little runt.
Shigaraki took Izuku's seat at the bar.
By the way, this is my seat, runt. Try not to sit in next time, and this won't happen again.
The burning began to subside as Izuku stared up at the ceiling with ringing ears and blurred vision. He had no idea what Shigaraki's quirk was, but he got the feeling he was not someone to antagonize. He crawled up from the floor and sat with his back against the bar, struggling to calm his breathing. He glared up at Shigaraki, who was calmly taking a drink from a bottle of water. The hand removed from his face now lay on the bar. After a few minutes, Izuku moved to a seat several spots away from Shigaraki. Kurogiri slid Izuku his orange juice, and he drank it quietly as his mind raced. Did they really have to stay here? He had no issues with Kurogiri and his gentlemanly attitude, and even Toga's psycho attitude was bearable compared to this masochistic Shigaraki. But if this was the man leading the operations here, Izuku didn't know if he wanted to be a part of any of it. Hopefully Stain would return soon and say that the police are gone, and that they can start working on relocating their base of operations. Shigaraki broke his train of thought.
So, Izuku, what do you think of the League of Villains?
He wasn't looking in Izuku's direction. Instead, he was staring at the television, still taking sips from his water. Izuku glanced at Kurogiri, who showed no particular interest in the answer as he continued to clean the glasses behind the bar. Toga, however, had more than enough curiosity for both of them as she plopped down next to Izuku, her hands folding under her chin.
Hey Izuku, what do you think of us? I hope you like us. It would be a shame if you had to leave so early.
She giggled and spun herself around in the chair, blushing the entire time. Izuku was unsure of what to say. He couldn't tell them the truth, that he was disgusted with their goal and that he was even more disgusted with their cruel leader. However, if he lied and they found out, they may kill him. He chose his words carefully.
You guys have set a very high bar with your goal of killing All Might and dismantling the heroes. It won't be an easy task, and it won't be an easier task afterwards either. As well as I thought the general population will stand by while we wreak havoc on the innocent. But you have a strong team and strong numbers, and I think with proper planning and execution, you might actually be able to succeed.
He kept his voice as steady and neutral as possible, so that he didn't give away his disgust at the thought.
However, I'm not too sure I'll be able to help you at all, being quirkless and still young. I haven't had nearly as much training, and most of my encounters with pro heroes have ended in failure, even with Stain's assistance.
Shigaraki snorted at the response as he got up from his seat.
You definitely won't be much of a help as you are now, and especially not with that cowardly attitude.
He threw his empty bottle on the table and grabbed a hand from the table before walking off down the hall, shaking his head. Kurogiri quickly threw the bottle away and sighed. Shigaraki can be hard to deal with sometimes. He's powerful and he lets that get to his head more times than anyone would care to admit. But when it comes time to make the hard decisions and execute our plans, he's a fantastic leader. Now if you'll excuse me, I have some business of my own to attend to. A portal behind Kurogiri opened, and he stepped through it, leaving Izuku and Toga sitting alone in the bar as the television played through commercials. Himiko grabbed Izuku's arm.
I know! You said you didn't have much training, so let's fix that! I'll train you as much as I can until Stain gets back!
She pulled him from his seat, leading him out the back door of the hideout into a large clearing that appeared to be an abandoned playground.
Toga, are you sure this is a good idea? What if someone happens to walk by and see us? What if it's a hero?
Izuku wasn't only afraid of being discovered, but he was also wary of being alone with the blushing, psycho girl who could never stop giggling. As if reading his thoughts, Toga giggled some more.
Don't worry, silly little Izuku. This part of town is abandoned. No one ever comes through here besides us villains. Now show me what you can do.
Toga took a basic fighting stance, her feet apart and hands in front of her.
Normally I have my knife and my extraction machine for my quirk, but I'm not trying to kill you, so I'll just fight unarmed.
She giggled again.
This is going to be so much fun.
Izuku took his own fighting stance. He didn't know what to expect, as he had only ever sparred with Stain. He didn't know Toga's movements or abilities. He would have to make it up as he went. Toga suddenly dashed at him, quickly closing the distance between them, but not nearly as fast as Stain would. Izuku dodged to the side, swinging his leg out behind him in an attempt to sweep Toga's feet out from under her. She jumped over his leg effortlessly, landing on the other side of him and kicking him hard in the side. The blow was hard, but still not nearly as bad as Stain's. Izuku used the movement to roll to the side before he dove at the off-balance Toga, slamming her into the ground and pinning her.
Not bad, little Izuku. Not bad at all, but you forgot to finish the fight.
Toga drove her knee hard into Izuku's groin, knocking the breath from his body and sending shockwaves through his body. He fell over, landing next to Toga, grunting in pain.
Looks like I win.
Toga giggled as she danced around the curled-up body of Izuku.
That was a cheap shot, Toga. That wasn't fair at all.
Izuku had finally recovered from the low blow.
Cheap shot? There's no such thing in a fight, idiot. You have to do what it takes to win. Rules are for heroes, and we're not heroes.
Toga had started to talk back inside.
Our training is done for today. I'm bored already.
Back inside, Izuku retreated to his room to take a short nap. Between Shikaraki's torture and Toga's cheap shot, his body was exhausted. He collapsed into his bed, where he had the strangest of dreams. In it, he was in a dark, auditorium-like room. There were a bunch of heroes and villains there, and they were all fighting. And just as it seemed like the villains were winning, the wall exploded, and in walked the world's #1 hero. "There's no reason to fear! I am here!" All Might shouted, before dashing between the villains, knocking them aside as if they were weightless. Soon it was just Izuku and All Might. All of the other villains collapsed on the floor. All Might turned to Izuku, cracking his knuckles. "I cannot be defeated by evil!" He dashed towards Izuku, and he woke with a scream. Did the villains really stand a chance at all against that kind of power? Izuku shook the dream from his mind. It was just a dream after all, and from what he had heard, All Might was no longer the powerful god hero that he once was. The rumors even went so far as to say that he was close to retiring and becoming a teacher at UA. He really hoped so, as that would simplify the League of Villains' plans. Izuku crawled out of bed and walked down to the main room. It was now almost full, villains sitting around drinking and laughing and talking about the day's events. Some had been scouting, some had been stealing and robbing, some had been recruiting. Everyone had a part to play to the operations of the hideout. Izuku looked around the room for any sign of Stain, but he couldn't find him. Worry began to eat at his mind. Had Stain been captured, killed, or had he simply abandoned Izuku to the care of the League of Villains? He sat at the end of the bar, away from the rest. Kurogiri approached him. "A drink, young Izuku. It's a lively bunch here tonight, but I'm sorry to say Stain has not yet returned." He poured Izuku a glass of warm cider and handed it to him. "Here, something to drive off the chill of worry. Even if he does not return tonight, you're in good company, and nowhere is a safer place for a villain than here at the bar." Izuku thanked Kurogiri and sipped his cider in silence, watching the villains around him. Most were already drunk, spewing nonsense and laughing at each other. Nearby, an arm wrestling competition had started between the larger villains, until eventually the table was smashed in half. It was a comfortable, inviting atmosphere, but Izuku couldn't shake the feeling from his mind that something wasn't right. He stayed up most of the night, long after the patrons of the bar had left, staring at the door, waiting for Stain to return and to deliver good news. Soon the warm room and the drone of the television lulled him to sleep, and he eventually laid his head on the table and fell asleep. Thank you all for indulging yourselves in the story thus far. I hope you enjoyed it. Now there are a few more things that I'd like to go over before the video ends. Firstly, we got a second channel called Anime Deep Dive. Anime Deep Dive goes deep into the facts and lore of a wide variety of anime. It's sure to expand your weeb knowledge for all kinds of series, guaranteed. On top of that, we have a third channel called We the Celestial Naruto What Ifs. It's what we do on this channel already, but in the vast world and lore of Naruto. Go check it out if you're in the mood for some jutsu action. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. Lastly, if you're interested in what we do here at We the Celestials, then I would like to extend out an invitation to join the team. The only caveat being, we only accept members 16 years and up to join our crew. You can sign up for whichever category fulfills your interests by joining the recruitment Discord using the link in the description below. Our Discord is an all-around fantastic place to be, whether you're a fan or looking to join our band of misfits. We're always looking for members to join us. Well, that's it from us for today's video, so thank you all for watching, and have a great day.